biggest record label in music signed a 6-year-old girl, recorded 2 songs with her in London, then told her family she was too young, and walked away. That girl was Connie Talbot, the gap-toothed child who stood on the Britain's Got Talent stage in 2007, sang Over the Rainbow without a single lesson in her life, and made Simon Cowell go quiet. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand why being dropped by Sony BMG was the best thing that ever happened to her, and why the real Connie Talbot story has almost nothing to do with Britain. She didn't have a plan. That matters. The Talbot family drove to the Britain's Got Talent audition in 2007 not because Connie had been training for this moment, not because a stage parent had spotted an opportunity. They went because it sounded like a fun day out. Connie was 6 years old. She had never taken a singing lesson in her life. The show's producers fully expected a novelty act, a cute kid who'd get a polite laugh and a gentle no. Piers Morgan later said he thought it was going to be a joke. Connie walked out, smiled a gap-toothed smile, announced she was going to sing Over the Rainbow, and then she sang it. The crowd rose before the first chorus. Amanda Holden cried. Simon Cowell, who had reduced grown adults to tears with a single word, and who was not in the habit of being surprised, went completely still. He called her pure magic. He told her he was going to make her earn £1 million that year. 11 million people watched the final of that first Britain's Got Talent series. Connie came second to opera singer Paul Potts in the public vote. But she came second in a show watched by 11 million people, with no training, at 6 years old, singing a song she had learned from watching The Wizard of Oz repeatedly with her grandmother, who was seriously ill at the time. Her grandmother passed away before the final aired. Connie had learned that song in that living room. That context was never discussed much during the broadcast. The industry immediately came calling, and then, almost as quickly, it turned around and left. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. Simon Cowell's Sony BMG label moved fast after the final. Connie was brought to London. She recorded 2 songs, Over the Rainbow and a cover of Smile. The photographers arrived. The momentum was real. Bookmakers had already installed her as the favorite for that year's Christmas #1. The machine was in motion. Then it stopped. Sony BMG pulled out of the deal. The official statement said the decision was made with the best intentions for Connie, taking into consideration her age. Her mother Sharon said something plainer, that they were told Connie was too young to be their sort of artist, and that the family had been advised to look for a company which looks after children. That statement reads differently depending on how you look at it. Whether the label was genuinely protecting a 6-year-old from the pressures of a major label promotional cycle, or simply calculated that the risk-to-reward ratio on a child act wasn't worth it, the result was the same. The deal was gone. Here's what's rarely mentioned. The Talbot family's response to this was not panic. It was not desperation. The family released a statement that contained one line that stood out. They said that while Connie loved what she was doing, fame and money will never matter. That family attitude shaped every decision that followed. Within weeks, Connie signed with Rainbow Recording Company, a label built specifically for her, spun out of an existing outfit called Rhythm Riders, in a 6-figure deal. The album would be recorded on a schedule designed around her school timetable. Rather than a professional studio, they recorded mostly in the spare bedroom of her Aunt Vicky's house. The producers didn't give her singing lessons. They asked the Talbot family to write down a list of the songs Connie would sing at her own birthday party. And that's when the decision was made. The one nobody around her saw coming. The first pressing was 50,000 copies. That's a modest but reasonable number for a debut from an unsigned child act with no label infrastructure behind it. The album, also called Over the Rainbow, came out on November 26, 2007, just months after the BGT final. It entered the UK albums chart at number 35. Critics were not kind. Reviews noted what they called a lack of depth in the performances. One reviewer questioned whether the album would have sold at all if the vocals had belonged to a 20-year-old. The expected Christmas #1 never materialized in the UK. The album sat at the bottom of the chart by December and was gone after 5 weeks. By any traditional measure, it looked like a modest commercial performance for a novelty act that had already had its moment. Except the 50,000 copies sold out in days. An additional 120,000 had to be pressed. The album was certified gold in the UK before Christmas, and Connie was presented with that gold disc by Philip Schofield on live television at the age of 7. By doing so, she became the youngest solo artist in history to enter the UK albums chart. Guinness World Records made it official. But the number that defined this story wasn't the UK chart position. It was what was happening on the other side of the world, driven entirely by a platform that most music industry executives were still treating as a novelty: YouTube. Asian press covering the album's Asia tour in 2008 noted that some of her performance videos had been watched more than 14 million times. Others had crossed 30 million. In Taiwan, South Korea, and Hong Kong, markets where the Britain's Got Talent format had aired, the response was not polite interest. The album hit #1 in all 3 countries. It reached #3 in Singapore. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. While the British press filed Connie Talbot under Where Are They Now?, she was headlining concerts in Seoul. This is the part of her story that almost no coverage in the UK or the US ever fully addresses. From 2008 onward, Connie built a parallel career entirely outside the Western pop structure. And it was a real career, not a nostalgia circuit. She toured Asia repeatedly. In November 2010, she performed as the opening act for the Road to Hope concert in South Korea, tied to the opening of the G20 World Summit in Seoul. Every world leader was in the room. Millions watched online. In early 2011, she traveled to China to perform at the country's National New Year celebrations, broadcast to more than 400 million viewers on Chinese state television. 400 million people. She released Beautiful World in 2012 with Hong Kong's Evolution Limited, a proper label deal, a proper world tour, and the album debuted in the top 10 in both Hong Kong and Taiwan. She followed it with Matters to Me in 2016, which charted at #12 in both markets. That same year, she co-wrote the lead single, Shut Up, Move On, the first time she'd put her name on original material. All of this happened between the ages of 7 and 16, with her parents ensuring she maintained over 92% school attendance throughout. Photographers would climb trees at her school to photograph her through classroom windows. Her parents were aware. They kept her in school anyway. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. When Connie was 13 years old, a man began contacting her online. It started as online messages. It escalated to death threats. Eventually, the man arrived at the Talbot family home. He was carrying knives and pepper spray. Connie has spoken about this publicly in interviews, including a June 2024 appearance on the Deep YouTube channel. She described fame as something that had exposed me to the darker sides of the world that probably a child wouldn't hear of till later in life. The family had already dealt with a journalist who approached them under false pretenses early in Connie's career, a man who claimed to work for a newspaper but, as Connie described it, was just interested in children. Her parents had shielded her from that. The stalker situation was different. It required police involvement. It required a bodyguard assigned specifically to walk Connie to and from school each day, because there was a credible threat and her route was known. She was 13. She was sitting GCSEs. She had a bodyguard because a man had shown up at her house with weapons. None of that was public at the time. The public version of Connie Talbot in 2013 was a child star who had faded from British screens and presumably grown up quietly somewhere in the Midlands. The private version was something considerably harder. She has also spoken about the bullying she faced at school, from classmates who mocked her for her singing and her appearance, about the anxiety that built during those years, about the paparazzi in the trees, about the gradual process of therapy and personal growth that helped her rebuild confidence and resilience before stepping back onto stages as an adult. She never talked about this publicly, until now. In 2019, Britain's Got Talent brought back its most iconic alumni for a Champions series. Connie Talbot walked onto the BGT stage for the first time in 12 years. She was 18 years old. She sang an original song called Never Give Up on Us. Amanda Holden said she was blown away. Simon Cowell, who had once promised to make her a millionaire before walking his own label away from the deal, told her, "I don't think we'd be sitting here today if it wasn't for you." She didn't make it through to the top 3. The vote went to other acts. The following year, she appeared on America's Got Talent, The Champions, and was eliminated in the preliminary round. Neither result was the headline. The headline was that she showed up as a grown woman, singing her own music, on her own terms, and that the people in those seats remembered exactly who she was. The song Never Give Up on Us peaked at number 20 on the Scottish Albums chart. For a self-released single with no major label behind it, that was not a failure. It was a signal. She began releasing music consistently from that point. Original work alongside covers, building a catalog that reflected the adult version of the artist rather than the child novelty the industry had tried to manage. By 2022, collaborations with Boyce Avenue were generating hundreds of thousands of streams per track. The Growing Pains EP in 2023 landed on New Music Friday playlists across Spotify, Apple Music, and Deezer simultaneously. Not because a label pushed it there, but because the algorithm responded to the numbers. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got. Until now. As of 2026, Connie Talbot is 25 years old and fully active. In February 2025, she signed a management deal with Worldwide Entertainment Group, the first formal management structure she had operated under in years. The deal was described as supporting her growth as an independent artist, rather than placing her inside a traditional label system. Throughout 2025, she completed a multi-date UK tour. The dates included the Bread Shed in Manchester and KU Bar in Stockton-on-Tees. Not arena shows, but sold-out rooms filled with fans who had followed her for years, and new ones who found her through streaming. She delivered set lists that ran from Growing Pains originals back through the catalog, including the songs people had known since they were children themselves. A new EP called Original arrived in early 2026. Alongside it came a series of standalone singles, including Didn't See It Coming, Open Arms, and a cover of When You Say Nothing at All. Her Instagram following sits at around 409,000. Her YouTube channel carries well over 1.6 million subscribers and a back catalog that has accumulated hundreds of millions of views across 2 decades. There is also a film in the reported pipeline. The project, called The Key to the West, reportedly involves Connie in a leading role, a film described as involving significant singing and dancing sequences, with production reportedly involving locations in Montana and Los Angeles. No release date has been formally confirmed. What is confirmed is this: the estimated net worth placed on her career as of 2025 sits at around $3 million. That figure belongs to an independent artist who was dropped by a major label at age 6, recorded her first album in her aunt's spare bedroom, and built her fan base one YouTube view at a time. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. The easy version of Connie Talbot's story ends in 2007. Cute kid, talent show, big moment, faded away. That's the version most people carry. That's what the Where Are They Now articles are built on. The actual version is more interesting and considerably harder. It's a story about a family who decided that a child's stability was worth more than the commercial machine that wanted to use her. About an industry that dropped a 6-year-old and then watched her sell out her first pressing without them. About a market, Asia, that treated her not as a novelty, but as an artist, before any Western outlet had figured out what YouTube was actually capable of. And it's a story about what happens after the cameras leave. The years when nobody was watching, the bodyguard walks to school, the anxiety that came from growing up as a public figure before a person has any framework to process what that means. Connie Talbot is not a child star who burned bright and disappeared. She is a working musician who has never stopped. The gap between her public profile and her actual output is not a gap in her career. It's a gap in the coverage. She's been out there the whole time. Most people just stopped looking. The little girl who sang Over the Rainbow in 2007 is now a 25-year-old independent artist with a new EP, a management deal, a European tour, and a film role on the horizon. And she built all of it without the label that told her she was too young. There are more original songs coming. There is more touring planned. And there is a generation of fans in Taiwan, South Korea, and Hong Kong who never thought of Connie Talbot as a footnote. They just thought of her as Connie. The question worth asking is this: if the industry had kept her in 2007 and given her the full promotional machine, would she still be making music at 25, on her own terms, in her own voice? Or would she have been used up and moved on from long before she ever found out what she actually wanted to say?